Hello, I'm Dee Blake with the League of Women Voters. I'm here today with Representative Rob Nosse of Oregon District 42nd. We're here at the MetroEast Community Media as part of our general November 2016 election guide. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Representative Nosse, can I call you Rob?
Yeah, that's totally fine.
Okay, great. Let's start by asking, if you're reelected, what will be your top priorities for your district?
I have a lot of priorities actually if I'm reelected for a second term. I'm very interested in getting lead out of our water and toxins out of our air. The whole thing with Portland Public Schools and the lead in their water and the bullseye glass, that's been a real wake-up call, I think, for a lot of people, and me included. I particularly want to address diesel engine emissions. Oregon has some of the dirtiest diesel gas on the West Coast. I want to continue to find ways to have more funding for schools, including early childhood education and colleges and universities. I got my start working in the labor movement, and I'm going to continue to work for things that bring justice to the workplace and advance the cause of workers in general. I really believe we need to do something around rent stabilization in our community, and I look forward to working in the legislature to try to repeal the ban on those statutes. I'm also spending a lot of time in a work group looking at how we might lower the cost of prescription drugs, and I'm really hopeful that maybe we'll make progress on that issue. I'll support any sensible gun regulation that can pass, and I want to continue to work to push for police reform and do what we can to provide for training and interventions to try to minimize some of the profiling that goes on.
Okay, great. Well, taking up on the issue of gun safety, do you have any particular priorities for improving that?
There's two things in particular that I'm really interested in trying to pass in the next session. There's this thing called the Charleston loophole, which says that if you don't pass a background check after 3 days, you automatically get to have a gun. And I guess I believe that if you don't pass a background check, you don't get to have a gun until you do.
Okay.
So that's one thing I would like to change, and it's called Charleston loophole because the person that got that gun and shot all those people in Charleston had not passed the background check in 3 days, and then he got a gun. The other thing I'm interested in doing is figuring out how we could have a ban on citizens having assault rifle weapons like the kind that was used at the Pulse nightclub. I don't think anybody that's hunting or even owning a gun for their own personal protection needs that style of military-grade weapon.
As you know, Measure 97 is campaign
Yes.
for and against is underway big
Absolutely.
time. How will you address the predicted budget shortfall if Measure 97 fails?
That's a great question. I really hope that that measure passes. We need to do everything we can to have the funding that we need for senior services, for health care, for schools. I think if that measure doesn't pass, I'll work with the other legislators to try to protect funding for K-12 education and universities, but I got to be honest with you, I don't think that'll be possible to do without additional taxes. And I imagine we'll look at various tax breaks or tax expenditures that we, give to corporations and people and see if we can continue to afford to do those if that measure doesn't pass.
Okay. Turning to transportation infrastructure, which is
another big issue,
part of our budget. How can legislature ensure that there are adequate funds to address that?
So we have not raised our gas tax in this state probably in a decade at least. I think that's how we pay for roads and bridges. And Oregonians have told us loud and clear that they want our roads to be improved and maintained. And so we'll have to raise the gas tax to be able to do that. But there's other things besides roads and bridges. There's metro, there's transportation, there's additional light rail, there's bike paths. And to pay for some of those things, if we want to make improvements in those areas of transportation, we may have to look at, tolling or payroll taxes as well if we're going to have the kind of robust transportation system, not just for our economy, but for our quality of life. I don't know about you, but I feel like I spend way too much time commuting. Yeah,
I understand. In a related area, carbon dioxide emissions. What, if anything, do you think State of Oregon should be doing to further reduce that?
These questions are really hard.
Yeah, good.
I think the best way to solve the whole climate change, carbon emissions situation is to do like we did in the 1980s under President Reagan when we solved acid rain by having a kind of cap and trade program. And most people that have studied this issue think that that's the best way to go. You put a cap on the number of emissions, you charge polluters based on the emissions they're making, and provide an incentive for them to reduce their carbon pollution. And that's probably the best way that we'll make progress on that issue. I don't know if the legislature is going to take that up in earnest or not in 2017. I hope so. I think the Senate's going to take the lead on that, and I look for, if a bill comes out, I'll certainly support it.
Does the state legislature have a role in encouraging increased local or state production of alternative energy sources?
We do, and we can. We sometimes give tax credits and incentives to solar and passive heat, things like that make it possible to create energy from wind. And that's certainly something we can think of. Sometimes if we can just make outright investments as well. And I think, sometimes if you want to make something happen, you've got to spend resources in order to make that happen. Absolutely, the legislature can do that.
Okay. Do you envision a statewide approach to ending homelessness or easing homelessness and increasing affordable housing?
That is a great question too. I think the way homelessness happens in our state is experienced differently in every community. Right. And, I certainly see what's going on in my neighborhood with all the camping and the expense of rent. But we hear about this being a problem in Bend and LeGrand and Coos Bay as well. From the legislature, I think, repealing the ban on rent control and making it so that each community has the opportunity to consider whether or not that is an approach that they should take makes the most sense. And, hopefully the state can also find additional resources to help local communities bond and build more low-income housing.
Okay, great. What sets you apart from your opposition for this race?
Well, I'm in my first term, and I think what I was struck by a lot in serving in my first term is the amount of complexity that we deal with, even being for a relatively small state. There are rules and laws and policy choices that have to be made on just about every single subject that you can think of, from what judges are paid to transportation and education, and what's good forestry policy. Okay. And I think why I should be reelected is I have experience working in a lot of those areas, and I think you acquire knowledge and skill and ability the longer you've been doing at it. And I think I've learned a little bit more about how to be an effective legislator, and I think in a second term I'll be able to do a better job based on having a good first term experience.
Okay. What have been your priorities in your first term?
So when we get down to Salem, we get on committees, and since we don't really amend bills on the floor, we do all the work in committee, and bills come out to be voted on with a yes or no vote. My zone has sort of been healthcare because of my nurses union background, revenue and taxes. I started working on tax reform in the 1990s when I was a young student activist in college, and then I've also been on the Business and Labor Committee. My background in the labor movement made me a good fit for that. And so those have kind of been the three areas that I've really worked on, though I'm coming up to speed on a lot of environmental issues based on the lead situation in the Portland Public Schools, and Bullseye Glass is located right in my district. So this air quality emissions thing has become a priority for me because it's a big one for my constituents. Okay.
And just one last thing, just in case someone doesn't know what your district is, can you just...
Sure. So it's southeast Portland. The Willamette River is the border on the west side. Reed College is sort of the border on the south side. I grab the Woodstock neighborhood, hug Franklin High School, but don't have it directly. Then kind of 50th is the border on the east side, and then I-84 is the border on the north. It's a very compact district, actually.
Great. Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you very much for watching. This has been the League of Women Voters 2016 Video Voters Guide. The general election is November 8th. Be sure to inform yourself about the candidates and the ballot issues that are before us on November 8th. And voter registration, by the way, ends October 18th. So be sure to register if you haven't already. Thank you so much, Rob, for coming today.